I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guy podcast. Joining me today is my friend, playwright Lynne Childress, founding artistic director of Building Better People Productions, a theater for young audiences. The company is in Annapolis, Maryland. Lynne's 28-year career in professional theater includes performing at the Kennedy Center, Arena Stage, and Adventure Theater, and teaching for institutions like the Folger Shakespeare Library. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, and I will say I should have updated. It's now 31 years.
And for those watching, that seems impossible, but not
a baby.
A prodigy of the theatrical arts. I'm very curious if you could tell folks what got you started in theater, what inspired, how far back your interest goes, and so forth. I know as Black folks ourselves, it's not always seen as something that we can actually do. We don't often see ourselves on the stage. I mean, certainly, even in movies, but definitely on the stage. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and like a very long story. I try to make it as short and not as ADHD addled as possible. But I started doing theater plays and such, theater/plays and such, elementary, middle school, high school. But I always thought that I was going to be, I thought I was going to be teacher, then I thought I was going to be social worker, or psychologist, then I was going to be social worker. My bachelor's degree is in psychology. And it didn't hit me that, like you said, this was something I could do as a thing. My mom's a social worker. My twin sister, Leslie Grace Streeter, has known since she wrote her first song at 3, and she knew since 9th grade that journalism was what she wanted to do as a career. And twins compare themselves to each other a lot, and other people compare us, like, you're the nice one, you're the this one, you're the that one, right? And so for a while, Leslie knew what she wanted to do, but then when I look back, 9th grade, theater was my thing. Leslie was on the newspaper, and our parents actually wouldn't let me join the newspaper until 10th grade. And they wouldn't let Leslie be in the drama club until 10th grade because they wanted each of us to establish ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize I was establishing myself in that. I played the clarinet, and I thought I wanted to play for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra at some point. That's what I felt I was good at, even though I had a great voice, and I can say that I could sing. I still can sing. And but what happened was in college, I was a psych major. I was in one student-led production in my freshman year, and I was on the forensics team, which is not cutting people up, but the public speaking and public speech interpretation team. So I was doing these things, but I still thought that this wasn't for me because I wasn't a theater major. So I graduated from college. We moved to Miami because my parents had moved there. And Leslie and I were like, great, free rent for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And my dad gave us like a month to spend our graduation money, and then came out to the pool of the apartment building where we lived with the one ads. This was 1993, and said, the vacation's over, get a job. And so I was working at Payless. Leslie was working at Clothes Time, which is a now defunct, well, they're both now defunct retail stores. But I was applying to social services jobs in a city with a large Spanish-speaking population. And I speak some Spanish, but I wasn't fully fluent. And so I wasn't able to get social services job because I could not serve the people socially the way they needed to be served because I did not speak the language. So I worked at Payless. I was doing a horrible customer service job that I quit because I was having headaches. That's a whole nother story. But I didn't have a job, and I saw a theater company was looking for a regional theater in Miami called the Coconut Grove Playhouse, was looking for acting apprentices. So basically for young actors to be in their shows at toward schools. So, don't shoot people, be nice to people, like that kind of message kind of thing. The assembly that you see in school, and I auditioned because I was like, well, I'm applying to grad school for social work, but this is outreach. And I have these skills because I had a monologue, I had a song. I went in with no resume and no headshot, and I got the job, and I wound up working at that theater for a few seasons. But in my head, I was still going to go to grad school, but in social work. But something said to me, do you know who the actor Mark Margolis is?
Mhm.
You know, Mark Margolis was in a show on the main stage at the Coconut Grove Playhouse called Broken Glass. It was written by Arthur Miller. And this production was Mark Margolis, Linda Lavin, Howard Hessman, uh, uh, Johnny Fever from WKRP, and the teacher and the head of the class was in the show. And I was an intern, like I said, at the theater. But one of the things that I did, the woman who was the head of the education department that I worked for was also in the show. And I got to help Mark Margolis run his lines. And at that point, I still didn't know what I was doing. And he said to somebody, well, Lynne has to decide what she's going to do. Is she's going to be an actor? Is she going to be a social worker? None of this makes sense. I had this thought backstage on holding book for another show. And basically that's when you help actors with their lines. I realized that I was doing what I wanted to do, that this wasn't the thing that was, because I got into grad school, but I delayed because I couldn't afford it. And I realized I was doing what I wanted to do. And so I'm the rare person who got into acting because I couldn't do the other thing, and not the other way around, that I did something else because I couldn't get into acting. And so that's a sort of roundabout way but it was always in me, right? I'm every actor. It's all in me, right? It was already there, but I didn't realize it because, like you said, that didn't seem like a thing that I could do, even though I was doing it.
Mm-hmm. And often sort of the example that would be out there would be sort of sometimes limiting to our own sort of experiences. So I remember a lot of even Spike Lee's early work, but then John Singleton's, my teens, it's like, I loved it. And I love the style of, especially Spike Lee's work, but, that was very far removed from my own personal experience. I grew up in rural South Carolina, but very, leave your doors unlocked type of life, and not anything that was like Boys in the Hood, or not anything like even Do the Right Thing. Those tensions were not what I had growing up. So my own kind of inherent geekiness or weirdness, I was drawn to sort of people like Christopher Durang, for instance. But if anything I would write like that would be seen, well, but you're Black. Like, why would you want to do something quirky like that? Why would you want to do a weird place and things? And so it is, as much love as I have for August Wilson and those people, those are not topics I was comfortable with or knew how to do. And it was sort of being told that it was not only that my own experience was not only sort of not quote unquote Black enough, which is insulting enough and untrue, but also what was there for, what people had interest of Black audiences. It's not something that I could do authentically.
Do you know who really, she's younger than me, but Issa Rae is the person who I look up to in terms of, she started an Awkward Black Girl, YouTube series, and then Insecure, and now she's everywhere. Kev on Stage has a podcast called Not My Best Moment, and it's brilliant. And it's he wrote a book about failure, and he had these famous people come on and they talk about the things that have gone wrong and the things that they've learned from, and it's really amazing. But Issa Rae, I only started watching, I binged Insecure in like 2 weeks. I binged all 5 seasons in really about 2 weeks. I was obsessed. But I wish that at that age that she was then, that I had the the gumption to just be weird and be every part of yourself and every bit of yourself, and to say there's an audience for this, I don't know how old you are, Stephen. I'm in my, how old are you?
51, 1974.
Okay, so we're the same age. We're Leslie and I say I talk in weeds because I have a twin. So we're 54. So we were born in 71. And for us, the first time seeing people like us was the Cosby Show. I wouldn't say that, because we loved what's happening. But the Cosby Show was one of the first upper middle class to upper class Black people that everyone saw across the board that way. The Jeffersons were rich, right? They were. So this was a family with young children, and my parents weren't a doctor and a lawyer, but they were a woman with a master's in social work and a guy who was in transportation management. And when Cosby came on, we had just moved back from Saudi Arabia for a year and a half, where my dad worked as a consultant for the bus company in Saudi Arabia. We lived in Riyadh for a year and a half. And so we had traveled, we'd done things, we'd seen, stuff. And that was representation in a way that other people thought was foreign and made up, when most of the Black people we knew came from 2-family homes. Not that that makes anybody better, but I'm just saying this, the image, right? Most of the people that we knew had college educated parents, lived in 2-family homes with professionals, sometimes even gasp, the mom stayed at home. But that was the first time, again, sort of seeing that. And people don't understand how much representation does. And the reason they don't see it is when you're used to seeing yourself represented, you don't think about the fact that nobody else is represented, because you've never had to think about it.
I remember, the frustration I'd had when Woody Allen, the film director, famously talked about how no Black people in his films, except for a prostitute. That was the first one 30 years ago. And Deconstructing Harry, but he talks about how it doesn't make any sense because that's not the type of stories I write. And it was like whatever, like sort of his exonerating statement was pretty damning, which is basically the idea is like, I can't write about the hood, or I can't write about this, as if none of the erudite people talking about philosophy at a cocktail party could be Black, or I don't know, any of the jazz music. You have jazz in all your movies. There's no Black people at the jazz club. There's none of that. And so I've always been, I gave sort of a shout out to the creators of the show, The Good Place, for how they casting of the one character, Shooty, who I identified with. I mean, the actor is a stunningly gorgeous man. So but the idea is that he's got the glasses. He's a nerd. He's a philosophy person. He was someone I could identify with, and he is Black. And there's no one telling him that he's not Black. Not Black. Right. He is his identity. And they do a lot of that. So they have sort of what you could see in the 1980s. The surfer dude is played by the dumb surfer dude is played by a man of Asian descent, and that would be something. In the 80s, were the typical stereotypes they would do, how it beats against that. You get a woman of perhaps Indian ancestry, Southeast Asian ancestry, as the uptight Brit, who would have been played by certainly a European woman, though this is perfectly authentic because of the culture of Britain now, and the quote unquote white trash, sort of almost, you'd imagine the Carla Tortelli character from the 80s is, Kristen Bell, the blonde, blonde lady. So kind of defying all these stereotypes, while not really, but it's reality, because these characters all would exist. It's just sort of like finally admitting there's a sort of a diversity of presentation in the world.
It's one of the Good Place is one of my favorite shows. I recently went back and watch I started with the last season,
Mhm.
and then I think went back, but I need to start all over again. But Jason Mendoza is one of my favorite characters to exist on television. And also Derek, because Jason Mantzoukas is a brilliant genius. But Jason Mendoza, who's the beautiful Manny Jacinto, is it's just a brilliant show. It's a brilliant show, and it is. I am. I'll say Christian by trade. I like Jesus, and sometimes it was this thing of like opening your mind to spiritual realities that don't look like the Judeo-Christian heaven or whatever that is, right? I think it is one of the smartest, most beautiful shows, and it's one of the few, not the few, but it is it stands out in a show that has such a big premise. A lot of those shows don't know how to end, like Lost, right? Shows that have these this world building, this built world kind of a thing, and sometimes they don't know where to end. The Good Place knew where to end, and like you said, to look back that out of a cast, so with the 4 humans, one of them was white. Only one of that forecast of the humans who are sent to, spoiler alert, not the Good Place in the beginning, and are the stand-ins, proxies for humanity.
Yeah.
They're trying to save humanity, and only one of them is white.
Yeah.
And
it's
the
just
other
great.
two, right? And the other 2 white people are a demon and a robot, an all-knowing, I don't know. It's a brilliant genius show. But again, like you said, representation and seeing yourself. When you see yourself in everything, you don't understand how valuable that is, because you have been seen and are validated as seeing yourself as the default. And that reality, it's something I think about daily. It can't be overstated how huge that is. Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, yeah, and as someone who's worked in theaters and arts, like just 20 years ago, even 15, maybe 10 years ago, who would be sent out for, you go to your agent and it's like, well, they're not seeing people for this is the philosophy nerd. What we're not going to see. And Hollywood Shuffle, one of my favorite movies with Robert Townsend from the 80s, to date myself, but he would joke about this, and it's there's a lot of kind of gallows humor in that film, but the sense of these wonderfully classically trained Black actors.
Oh yeah,
Juilliard or whatever, and it's like, oh, I'm going to do some Shakespeare, I'm going to Shakespeare some important work, and it's just then it's like Pimp or drug dope, even going on to like Law and Order, you would see that path of like where you have to play and so forth, and the ability to sort of be just sort of different things, and just sort of, I think it's why I've always loved sci-fi. I've often made the comparison to sort of the TV show The West Wing, which I enjoyed. Very, very white, incredibly white.
So white.
It began the same year that Deep Space Nine ended. And Star Trek Deep Space Nine was a show with so much diversity. 2 leading men were Black, and they're in charge, and they're dealing with things and whatever. And a very smart political show. And then you shift, and it's also like, if you're a young, as myself watching this, it's like, oh my God, like, I don't want to be in this real world. The real, you're not expecting me to exist in this real world. It's like the classic Richard Pryor line. He sees Logan's Run. There's no Black people in the future. It's like, white people ain't planning for us to be here.
Come on. And the only main Black character in the West Wing was a young man whose mother was a police officer who'd been killed. And so he's kind of like the special case of, look, we're giving this young man a platform, but he's not an equal. He's not a contemporary of everybody else, of the right? Of like the quote real people who are in there
Not
working.
the Bush White House was more diverse at that time. It was one of the most damning
Yeah.
statements. Airing at the same time, it's like, okay, you've got Colin Powell, you've got Condoleezza Rice. You know, this is one of those damning liberalism moments. It's like, okay, there's
Yes.
no, you can't even imagine the deputy in your fictional, the deputy chief, chief of staff is black. You couldn't make Josh black. You couldn't make Toby black. Like these are, because these are all serve the purpose of the president. So why don't you do that? And instead, you just have. And we talked about this when the black characters are without any sort of communities. So he's
Oh my
alone,
gosh.
and his father figure is this white man, and you have, and it's not, well, where is his community? Like, where is that sort of, which you could have been very easy to do. And so again, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which had aired earlier, you had this great relationship between, Avery Brooks's character and his son. And this was a sci-fi show depicting something that often was very rare to see on TV, and it was just great. And so I give a shout out, of course, to Fresh Prince. Also showed a great family relationship, showing also Fresh Prince challenged sort of the for some reason my son loves not for some reason my son loves Murder She Wrote. We've been watching Murder She Wrote episodes.
It's my favorite.
And we will see like people from the 80s, and one of the and I was explaining to him because the villain, the murderer, turned out to be, she was played by the actor who was the mother on Webster. And I said at the time this would have been a shock because you wouldn't expect her to be the killer. And having explained Webster, and my wife was like, oh my God, like it's like, well, there's a lot of this, like, of adopting black kids, well-intentioned, but like weird, because the idea that there's no, but in the black community, the idea of like, you have that this black kid is orphaned, and even with the Drummonds, there's no cousins or relatives, there's no one out there who would help. Whereas the, Fresh Prince showed of like, no, we do look out for our own. We will take in our, and he's not even, he's his father's not around, but his mom is struggling to keep him on the right path in a tough neighborhood. We're going to bring him in and look after him. This kind of goes back to you. So if in your work, how has it sort of shaped the stories you like to tell, to write, and to work with people on in your company?
So my theater company does theater for young audiences, and everything that we do is social, emotional health, empathy, kindness, understanding. We did a show about anxiety. I didn't write that one. But that's sort of what we're about. And sort of the first piece I wrote was 2015. It was a shorter piece that was about being able to everyone, you can still be great and wonderful, but be different, right? Different, wonderful doesn't look the way. And it became this longer three. I wanted to make it longer, and it became this sort of 3 vignette piece called We Got It, a show about empathy. It's very on the nose. Like, we talk about what is empathy? It's a whole, it's not up with people, but it's the thing that comes to your school that you get out of class to watch. And, but there's a part that I wrote that was about shared loss, and it came from being pregnant with a son when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and reading all of these online discourse. So this is 2012, reading all this online discourse about people who refuse to see this person as human and also as a child. And then the same with Tamir Rice. And it was a whole thing. So I say not famously, because nobody knows who I am, but I say a lot that instead of wanting to punch people, I decided to sort of write it out. And that was the first thing I'd written. And I had been working with a lot of other people, teaching, directing for other people and other, children's theater programming and such. And I decided to do my own thing. And so that was always um race, even though I made it, instead of a race thing, it was a guy with a large teddy bear and a girl with a large stuffed dog, and the kid with the teddy bear not understanding why the girl with she who's very annoyed by the girl with the dog, and the dog goes missing and he doesn't get it, and then the bear goes missing, and then he gets it that it doesn't matter if the things that we love are different things. I understand because you have lost and I have lost. And then they, everything turns out great at the end. But it's the idea that you don't have to like all the same things. The fact that you love something and I love something, we have something in common, because nothing is better. It's that I see that empathy of you like what you like and I would like what I like, even to a deeper thing of like your loss is as big as my loss. And so those are the kinds of things that excite me, even if it's sort of dead on, like, explaining what empathy is, but then, showing it. I love things that are simply about people understanding people, but not always in a pat way. One of my favorite things I've written, you talked about Murder, She Wrote. I love Murder, She Wrote. I used to call my favorite genre old white people solving crimes is my favorite genre of things. Diagnosis Murder, which is all the seasons are on Hallmark Plus. Diagnosis Murder. I love Columbo. I love Elsbeth, who's not old, but that's a Columbo. I loved Poker Face because it got canceled, which is ridiculous. But I wrote a mystery about a mother and son, based on sort of me and my son, a Black mother and son who she's been homeschooling, and then the parents, mom and the dad, decide to send him back to school so she can go back to work and he can be around other people who aren't her. And they sort of had mixed feelings about it, but they, as sort of like a last hurrah before he goes back to school, solve a neighborhood mystery about things that have gone missing in the neighborhood, like things out of people's yards. And it's one of my favorite things I've ever written. But it also talks about people saying things to him like, he speaks so well, and those sorts of like microaggression-y things that people don't understand, and people not recognizing other people's pronouns. And I don't know, I love writing things that aren't just so like dead on, but at the end of it gives you something to think about. Those are the things that excite me when people are thinking about the way they treat other people. And empathy is such a word that gets bandied about, but we are literally living in a time where people think that they're more important and their lives literally matter more than other people's do. And those stories can't be told enough.
Well, art is empathy, as an empathy exercise. As a friend of mine at the theater I'm involved with here in Portland often says, is about enhancing empathy. And I think that also goes to the types of stories people are willing to watch. I can appreciate when a lot of the Black stories that would get greenlit or would get put out there are traumatic, because even there are some Black people who don't want to see that. That's like, no, I want to see I want to see Star Wars. Put some Black folks in Star Wars. Put some Black folks in my, I want to see that. I live my life. I don't necessarily want to see about, we call it trauma porn, right? I don't necessarily want to see about that. And so I get white people being just as likely to be like, this is a very heavy topic, I don't want to see that. What gets me is when it's like a Black version of a Hallmark movie and white audiences don't see it. It's like, well, this is your jam, so why are you staying away? And that's something I think we do have to confront in the theater world, and so seen it as well. This is like you will do a straight up romantic comedy and it's a Black audience, it just doesn't do as well.
In 2020, when everyone was home, and in some ways, I'm not bored, but everyone was home. A lot of people, not everybody, because there are people who had to be out, right? But a lot of people were home and working from home, or not working at all, but were at home. There was a big, with the murder of George Floyd, there was a big call and enlightenment of some people in some ways, right? About telling different stories. And I was on a lot of Zooms. Some there were, Black theater people in the DC area. I'm in Annapolis, Maryland. Black theater people in DC, Maryland, Virginia. Even though I'm closer to Baltimore, is not part of the DMV, but we are in Maryland. But so these conversations about Black art, and then I was also on panels and discussions and such about, and I was working with this one group who basically was they were getting white run theaters on board about really looking at and examining, it was this whole survey, how diverse your theater was by looking at who your leadership was, who your audience was, who your board was, who your staff was, the kind of work you're doing. And there were all these people who, because they were home and nobody could go out, were making all of these commitments, with a star next to it, with an asterisk, about we're going to look at our board and we're going to look at this and whatever. And then in maybe a cycle of a season or two, a lot of them were back to doing mostly white work. And it was almost this idea of, don't make the promise if you're not going to do it. Like, we've already seen that a lot of, institutions are going to produce white work, and predominantly white work. And if that's what you want to do, cool. But don't say you're going to expand and care and then not do it when you don't feel that your feet are being held to the fire anymore, and you don't have to, and you can kind of just go back to what you were doing before because you aren't being pushed or pressured. And there are theater companies here who are really doing work of having truly diverse shows and seasons, but not just that, but who are their producers, who are their assistant production people, right? It's not just in the work, it's in who's making the work. When you think of Black people in our stories as an add-on, right? It's easy to decide, oh, you've told your story, now you're good. Okay, let's go back to quote regular stuff, unquote, and quote regular programming, unquote, and programming for general audiences, unquote, right? Let's go back to that because that's the norm, unquote,
Yeah.
right? And it's very easy to forget that there are more stories than ours. And though, when you are not used to seeing your stuff, you consume whatever is there, and stories that aren't predominantly white Christian, Judeo-Christian stories are often seen as, and I think Christian, right? Those that on Sundays we go to church and this is what we do and do this, and those are seen as the norm, and everything else is a departure, right?
Yeah.
This is the Jewish story, right? This is the holiday movie where they celebrate Hanukkah, right? This is the holiday movie where they do Kwanzaa. We don't really know what Kwanzaa is, but we're just mentioning it because we know it's a thing that the Black people like to do. And but then now we can go back to Christmas and Potato Falls. What is it called? Leslie called. It's not Strawberry Valley. Leslie has a name for Hallmark. And I love Hallmark movies. They make me very happy because it's uncomplicated white people. Usually it's okay, I know what I'm going to see. I'm going to see this, and it's great. And I also like when they have other people in them as well.
thank you so much for chatting with me. I know we kind of leapt on this after chatting about Wicked on
On
our
our
it was like
podcast.
on your podcast. So this is sort of a weird crossover spin-off, kind of like Mod becoming Good Times, becoming
Love.
I'll get all that. So this is so thank you for spinning off into my podcast here. Where can folks find you and learn more?
And then about so my sister and I and our producer Sam Lewis host Fine Beats and Cheeses. We are a podcast that is about pop culture guilty pleasures that I guess don't feel guilty about at all. I run Building Better People Productions. I am a commissioned playwright. I take commissions. I do workshops in theater. Like I said, mostly for young audiences and families. You can find us at bbpproductions.com. We do a lot of stuff in the DC, Baltimore, Virginia, Pennsylvania-ish area, but we do stuff and I will travel. But if you'd like to have the conversation again about how art, especially with young people, can change lives, which sounds so big and very vague, but it's really what I choose to do. And what I find sort of exciting is that you can not indoctrinate people, but that you can really start these conversations early in ways that seem less threatening. And that sounds like indoctrination, but I'm not talking about indoctrination. I'm talking about, but really using these artistic mediums for good.
Right. Well, thank you again, Lynne Streeter Childress. Check her out everywhere. Happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. And we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Thank you.